My son raised his hand to hit me right there in my own kitchen, and I stayed silent. No screaming, no crying, not a single sound came out of my throat. But the next morning, when he walked down the stairs with that triumphant expression, the look that said his mother had accepted the humiliation, he froze the instant he saw the person sitting at my breakfast table. I sat at the head of the table, gently smoothing the white lace tablecloth. Kendrick walked in with that arrogant gait, as if this entire house were his kingdom. He didn't even bother to look at the swelling on my lip. The only thing he ever cared about was himself. He reached for a biscuit, took a bite, and launched into a long speech about how things in this house needed to change from now on. But those words died in his throat when the chair beside me slid back just slightly. Kendrick's face, still flushed red from liquor, turned as pale as ash. The biscuit fell from his hand and shattered on the floor. Just that 1 second. He understood. My silence the night before had not been fear. It had been a sentence. But for you to understand why my son and I walked into a breakfast that felt like a courtroom, I need to introduce myself clearly. I am Althea Robinson, 68 years old, a widow living in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. You know the type, an old house with a wide porch and towering oak trees shading the front yard. That is my world. I have always been a gentle woman. I raised Kendrick alone from the day Robert, my husband, passed away. I worked 2 jobs for years just to make sure he never lacked anything. But about 6 hours earlier, I realized I had been living with an enemy under my own roof. Everything happened, or rather, fell apart, around 3 a.m. Kendrick came home. I was sitting in the kitchen, in my rocking chair, listening to a hymn playing softly on the radio to keep myself calm. Outside, the rain was heavy, but the sound that startled me wasn't thunder. It was the harsh, clumsy scrape of a key in the front door lock. Kendrick staggered in, reeking of cheap bourbon mixed with cigarette smoke. I stayed silent. He tossed his key ring onto the hallway table, and then came the loud crash. It was the blue ceramic vase my grandmother left me. He didn't even glance back to see what he had done. He stormed into the kitchen, and when he saw me, the anger inside him rose like a tide. He began shouting, telling me his life was miserable because of me, that I cared more about this house and its antiques than I ever cared about him. I stood up slowly and said one sentence, "Baby, go to bed. You're not sober." That was all. Just one sentence. But to Kendrick, it was gasoline on a fire. He lunged at me, a 41-year-old man, strong and fully grown, attacking his own mother. He grabbed my arm, shaking me so hard my teeth knocked together. Then he shoved me. My body slammed into the china cabinet. The hardwood floor struck my back and my head hit the glass. But he wasn't done. He raised his hand and slapped me so hard the sound echoed. The pain spread like fire. I tasted blood instantly. My lip had split. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just lay there, curled up, looking at my son, the child I had raised on every hard-earned dollar, breathing heavily from drunken rage. Then he turned his back and walked upstairs, leaving me bleeding under the dim kitchen light. The silence afterward was suffocating, the kind that settles when something has cracked so deeply it can never be repaired. I dragged myself into the small bathroom and looked at my reflection. I washed my face with cold water. I saw the split lip, the bruise forming on my cheek, and in that moment, staring into my own eyes, I didn't see a victim. I saw Althea, a woman who had survived far worse pains, and I made a decision right then. This would be the last time. If you think that slap was the lowest point, it wasn't. Because the person Kendrick saw at the breakfast table the next morning would be the one who changed the course of our lives. Stay seated, because in the next part, everything begins to turn. I went back to the kitchen, cleaned the blood off the floor as if I were simply wiping up spilled water, and instead of going to my room to collapse and cry, I started cooking. It was the only thing keeping my mind from falling apart. I took flour, butter, baking powder. Then I pulled out the champagne gold non-stick baking trays. My sister had mailed them to me last month. Marcia said, "They're good ones, Althea. Nothing sticks to them. And they're pretty, too." And indeed, I used them all night. While the neighborhood slept and my son snored upstairs, I baked one batch of biscuits after another. Each time I kneaded dough, I thought about what I needed to do. With every golden batch pulled from the oven, my plan grew clearer. I would not fight Kendrick with shouting. I would use the one language he had forgotten, respect, and the law. But for you to understand why I reached that decision on such a terrible night, I need to take you back. Because to understand a mother's actions, you must understand the woman she used to be. Before I reopen those doors of memory, remember this: none of us become strong overnight. We are forged through good days and dark nights. And sometimes the past is the clue to everything that is about to happen. I set the breakfast table as though preparing for Christmas. White lace tablecloth, the best china, fresh coffee, everything arranged perfectly. By 7:30, I was ready. The smell of food drifted upstairs like a sweet trap. I knew Kendrick would come down, and I knew he would think everything was fine again, just like every time before, because his mother always forgave him. But he didn't know that this time, forgiveness came with justice. As I waited, I looked over at the digital photo frame on the counter. Marcia gave it to me last Christmas. "You don't need photo albums anymore, Althea," she said over the phone from Atlanta. "I bought it online. It's beautiful. Just upload your pictures, and it changes scenes on its own to remind you of good things." And it did. The frame showed moments from an entire lifetime, beauty, joy, and things lost. A new photo appeared. Kendrick, about 8 years old, standing on a fishing boat. His hair was wild from the wind, his smile wide, showing the gap where his front tooth had fallen out. He held up a tiny perch like he had hauled in treasure. Beside him was Robert, my husband, laughing so proudly his eyes were almost shut. Oh, Lord, that picture punched me right in the gut. I leaned on the counter. Flour dusted my robe. I closed my eyes. I was no longer in the kitchen at 4 a.m. with a split lip and a bruised cheek. I was back at Lake Michigan on a summer day in 1990. I remembered the smell of sunscreen and damp earth. I remembered Robert's laughter echoing over the water. Kendrick had spent the whole morning waiting to catch a fish. He had been an incredibly patient child. When the rod jerked hard, his joyful scream made birds burst from the trees. "Daddy, I got one! I really got one!" Robert ran over and taught him how to hold the rod steady. "Look at this, Althea," he shouted to me. Back then, I was laying out lunch on the shore. "We've got a real fisherman in the family now." The pride in his voice. It was the most beautiful thing in the world. And Kendrick looked at his father the way children look at superheroes, full of respect, admiration, and pure love. Where did that boy go? Where did he lose his way? The frame shifted to another image. Kendrick's high school graduation. Blue gown, mortarboard, diploma in hand. I stood beside him, 30 years younger, smiling so wide my face looked ready to break. He was the first in our family to go to college. The first. Our church community, Apostolic Church of God, threw a celebration. Sister Eloise made carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. Pastor Michael blessed him from the pulpit, calling him our young scholar. I sat in that pew, my heart swelling. The son of Althea Robinson, the son of Robert. I believed every sacrifice I made had been worth it. But then, Robert passed. A heart attack at the harbor. That morning he left home for work, kissed my forehead, and never came back. Robert's death was an earthquake, shaking the foundation of our family. But I stayed standing, because Kendrick needed me. At the funeral, Kendrick held my hand tightly. He didn't cry in front of others. But that night, he hugged me in the kitchen and sobbed. "I'll take care of you now," he said. "I promise. I'll make Dad proud." And he did. For years he did. The frame changed again. A 4th of July barbecue. Kendrick stood by the grill wearing an apron that said King of the Grill, looking cheerful, a little fuller around the waist. Friends and neighbors were there. Clarissa, too. Her husband was still alive then. Looking at that photo, you'd think it was a happy family in a peaceful neighborhood. But happiness is a still picture. Real life moves, and sometimes it breaks before you even notice. Right after that barbecue, the cracks began to show. Kendrick's job was restructured. The port modernized, brought in new hires, eliminated old positions like the one Kendrick had held for nearly 20 years. They demoted him, stuck him in a corner office with less responsibility and less respect. To Kendrick, it wasn't just losing a title. It felt like they were erasing his father's legacy. He didn't tell me everything. He just grew quiet. A sharp, thorny, bitter kind of quiet. He came home later, smelled of alcohol. Long meetings, he said, and I pretended to believe it. Then money got tight. "Mom, can you lend me $200? I'll pay you back next month." I lent it. He never paid it back. Then it was $500, then more. The first time he yelled at me in a way that frightened me happened over something incredibly small. A leaky faucet. I was washing kale. He was reading the newspaper. "Can you fix the faucet for me, sweetheart?" He didn't even look at me. "Let it drip." The rudeness stunned me. I gently explained about the noise, about wasting water, and he exploded. He slammed the newspaper down, making the coffee cup jump. He stood up, and for the first time, I felt my son becoming an angry, unfamiliar man. "You worry about a faucet while my whole life is falling apart?" If Dad were alive, he wouldn't have let any of this happen. He was a real man, and you, always fussing over pointless things. I stepped back, heart racing, not because of the words, but because of his eyes. There was something poisonous and dark in them, something resentful I had never seen. And for the first time in my life, I feared Kendrick. He grabbed his keys, stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood alone in the kitchen, hearing only the faucet drip, 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 drip. Each drop marking the beginning of a new era in our home, an era of fear. I exhaled, pulling myself back into that cold morning. The smell of biscuits in the oven spread again, thick and warm, filling the air. I put on my oven mitts, pulled the tray out, the heat brushing my still bruised face. On the counter, the digital frame had changed to another photo. This time, it was me and Robert on our wedding day. We were so young, full of hope. "Oh, Robert," I whispered into the empty house, "you wouldn't accept the man our son has become." But for you to understand how we ended up this low, I must tell you about the 2 years of hell I lived through, because violence doesn't show up overnight. It is a process, a slippery slope you only realize you're rolling down when it's already too late. After the outburst about the faucet, nothing ever returned to normal. That incident seemed to fling open a door inside Kendrick, a door hiding a monster I never knew was there. And I, out of fear, out of shame, out of a mother's love that had turned toxic, let that monster stay, growing stronger each day. His full termination from the port happened 6 months later. On a Friday afternoon, they called him into the manager's office, handed him a cardboard box for his belongings. 20 years of service, packed into one box and pushed out the door like garbage. He came home that day, pale, holding the box like a coffin. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just placed the box in the middle of the living room, went upstairs, and stayed in his room for 2 days. I knocked, brought food, tried to talk, begged him to open the door. Silence. On the 3rd day, Kendrick came out, but the man standing there was no longer my son. Any remaining respect, any last spark of the boy who once made the entire church stand and cheer, had vanished. After that day, everything was my fault. If it rained, it was my fault. If his favorite team lost, my fault. And above all, his father's death, Robert's absence, was also my fault. "You never really understood Dad," he growled, breath reeking of alcohol at 3 in the afternoon. You think he was happy being a mule at that port? He worked himself to death for you, for this house. And you? You worship that chair he used to sit in more than the son he left behind. They were cruel lies. Robert loved his work. He was proud to support our family with his hands. And I loved Robert. I didn't worship chairs or tables. I preserved memories. But how could you explain that to a man determined to rewrite history just to justify his misery? I need you to understand this. Violence is not just fists, slaps, or broken furniture. It begins with accusations, with you gradually believing every bad thing in the world is your fault. That is when you become imprisoned, not just in your house, but in your own mind. The home that once sheltered me eventually became a battlefield. I learned to read the signs, the way he slammed the car door outside, the sound of his shoes on the steps. Just hearing his footsteps crossing the threshold, I could predict whether the night would be filled with screaming or the other kind of silence, thick, heavy, threatening. Both were torture. Financial manipulation worsened. He no longer borrowed, he demanded. Then he started using my credit card without asking. I opened bills and saw charges from bars, liquor stores. I tried to talk to him. "Kendrick, we need to watch our spending." The answer was always the same. "It's my money too, Dad's money. Or do you think this house pays for itself?" He erased from his mind the fact that I had my own pension, Robert's pension, and the income I earned sewing for the ladies in the neighborhood. In his head, everything belonged to him. The house was his, the money was his, and I was his. A piece of property to use, blame, or abuse at will. I became a prisoner in my own home. I stopped inviting friends for afternoon tea. Clarissa, my neighbor and closest friend, would sometimes stop at the gate and call out, "Althea, you okay? Haven't seen you around lately." And I lied. "Oh, Clarissa, just the arthritis acting up. I'm resting." Shame ate away at me. How could I tell her that my own son, the church's golden boy, the pride of the neighborhood, was treating me like trash? How could I admit I was terrified inside the very house Robert and I had worked our entire lives to build? I remember one night a few months ago. He came home, drunk as usual, but this time he was excited. He boasted about winning some money playing pool. He burst into the living room where I was watching television and flopped onto the sofa, laughing loudly. He wanted to chat, but I was exhausted after years on the emotional roller coaster he dragged me through. I just wanted peace. "Sweetheart, I'm tired. I'll go upstairs to sleep," I said, standing up. The change in his face was instant. The smile vanished. "Oh, sure. When I'm happy, you walk away. But when I'm miserable, you sit there with that holier-than-thou face, looking at me like I'm trash, right?" He stood, walked toward me. He didn't touch me, but he blocked my path to the stairs. Then he began whispering, and that was worse than yelling. "You love this, don't you? Watching me suffer makes you feel superior. The saintly widow who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful son. That's the story you tell yourself, isn't it? That's how you sleep at night?" He dripped those words like venom for nearly 10 minutes, and I just stood there, enduring it. I felt myself shrinking, smaller, weaker, with every sentence. When he finally tired out and stepped aside, I dragged myself up the stairs, trembling. In my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time in a very long time, I cried. I cried silently, burying my face in the pillow so he wouldn't hear. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had broken me. The beep of the coffee maker pulled me back to that early morning. The coffee was ready. I stood, a sharp pain in my back reminding me last night's violence had been different. It had crossed a boundary. He had laid hands on me in anger, and that slap, it hadn't just struck my face, it had struck my soul. I opened the cabinet, took out the finest china, the set I got for my wedding, painted with tiny blue flowers. I rarely used it, only on special occasions. And today, I decided, was the most special occasion of all. This would be my day of liberation. I set the table with obsessive care. white lace tablecloth, plates, silverware I had polished just last week. Then I took a small vase, placed a few white camellias from the garden inside, and set it in the center. The table looked beautiful, peaceful, orderly, a perfect scene, a perfect lie. As I placed the cups in their exact spots, I thought about the storm outside, the heavy rain from the night before, the wind howling against the porch. Nature seemed to be reflecting the chaos inside me. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the storm. Not the one outside, not the one sleeping upstairs. Because I knew, when the sun rose, the storm in my life would finally break. I glanced at the clock. 5:45. I still had time. Time to bake one last batch of biscuits, and time to make the phone calls. That would change everything. I sat in the darkness of the dining room, the cordless phone heavy in my hand. The house was almost completely silent, except for the steady sound of rain falling on the porch and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I looked at the glowing number pad. Each digit felt like a test. Pressing them meant turning everything into reality. It meant crossing a line I could never go back from. For a moment, the mother inside me, the one who had given birth to him, nursed him, sat up all night when he had a fever, hesitated. A frail voice whispered in my head, "That's your son, Althea, your only child. You can't do this to him." Then the throbbing pain in my head flared again, and the metallic taste of blood returned to my mouth. The hesitation evaporated like smoke. The man sleeping upstairs, snoring in the room I once decorated with all my love, was no longer my son. My son would not throw me into a cabinet. My son would not raise his hand and strike his mother. That man was a stranger, dangerous, and I needed to protect myself from him. I took a deep breath and dialed the first number. My finger trembled slightly, but the press itself was firm. The ringing sounded through the house, echoing in the terrifying quiet. Nearly 4 a.m. I was calling to wake a 73-year-old retired federal judge. By the third ring, a sleepy voice, instantly sharpening into one full of authority, answered, "Hello? Clarissa, it's me, Althea. I'm so sorry to call you at this hour, dear." There was a pause. I heard the rustle of fabric, movement. The drowsiness in her voice vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Althea, good Lord, what's going on? Are you all right? Is Kendrick okay?" Mrs. Clarissa DeBose, my neighbor for more than 40 years. We had watched our children grow up together, buried our husbands within months of one another, shared more cups of tea on the porch than I could ever count. But Clarissa was not just a friend. Before she retired, she had been one of the most respected judges in Illinois. A black woman who broke barriers, stood up to the system, and won. Her mind was sharp as a razor, and just her presence alone was enough to command respect. If there was anyone in this world who could understand the tangled mess of my situation, the blend of motherhood and terror, it was her. I swallowed hard, shame burning my throat. I need you, Clarissa. It happened again. But this time, it was worse." I didn't need to say more. On the other end, I heard her let out a heavy sigh, not of surprise, but of deep sorrow, as if the thing she had long feared had finally come true. "Did he hurt you, Althea?" Tears rose in my eyes, but my voice stayed steady. "Yes." "Call the police," she said without a moment's hesitation. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. "I will," I replied. "But first I need to ask you for something. I know it's a lot, but could you come to my house for breakfast at 8 a.m.? Another pause. I could almost see the gears turning in that brilliant mind. She didn't ask why I was talking about breakfast in a situation like this. She understood. She understood this wasn't about food. It was about witnesses. About power. "Althea, I'm not coming for breakfast." Her voice hardened into steel. "I'm coming to open court. Where is your son right now?" "He's fast asleep in his room," I whispered. "Good. Let him sleep. Don't talk to him. Don't make any noise. You just do what you have to do. I'll be there at 8. And Althea, yes? You're doing the right thing, the hardest thing, but the right thing. I'm proud of you." When she hung up, a wave of relief hit me so strongly my knees nearly gave out. I was no longer alone. The cavalry was on its way, and my cavalry wore a perfectly tailored suit and knew the Constitution of the United States by heart. If you're listening to this and wondering, how can a mother do that to her own child? Remember this. Sometimes, in order to save the child you once gave birth to, a mother has to confront the man he has become. And that night, I understood that loving myself was the last way left to love him. I inhaled deeply, gathered what little strength I had left, and dialed the second number. Chicago Police Department. A dispatcher on the night shift answered, sounding tired. "Chicago Police Department. What's your emergency?" "It's not exactly an immediate emergency." I tried to keep my voice slow and clear. "My name is Althea Robinson. I'd like to speak with Detective Vernon Tate, if possible." "Ma'am, it's 4:30 in the morning. Detective Tate is not currently on duty." "I know," I said, this time with a determination that surprised even me. "We attend the same church, Apostolic Church of God. Please, I need you to contact him. This is about domestic violence. I am the victim." The change in the dispatcher's tone was instant. The bureaucracy dropped away, replaced by urgency. "Please hold, ma'am." I waited, my heart pounding like it would shatter my ribs. Detective Vernon Tate, a good man. He was a deacon at our church. He had known Kendrick since he was just a little boy in the choir. He watched him grow up, watched him become a man. But he was also a police officer, an agent of the law. Tonight, I wasn't calling Deacon Vernon. I was calling Detective Tate, the officer, and I needed him to act like one. After a long, dragging minute, his deep, familiar voice came through, still tinged with sleep and worry. "Miss Althea, what's going on? Are you safe?" And then, for the second time that night, I had to put it into words. I had to turn my humiliation into sentences. "Vernon, Kendrick, he attacked me. He came home drunk and he hit me." My voice broke on the last word. I heard clattering sounds. He was probably pulling on clothes, scrambling out of bed. "Where is he now, Miss Althea? Is he still in the house? Do I need to send a squad car over right away?" No, I said quickly. "He's asleep. I'm safe right now." "Vernon, I don't want them to come right away. I don't want lights flashing, sirens blaring in the middle of the night, waking the whole neighborhood. I want to do this my way, with calm, with dignity." He went quiet, clearly weighing things. "I have a plan," I continued. "Mrs. Clarissa DuBose will be here at 8 a.m. I want you here too, Vernon. You and 2 other officers. I want you to walk in, sit down, and we deal with this like civilized people, before you take him away." Vernon sighed. The kind of sigh a man lets out when he's being stretched between duty and his affection for a family he cares about. "Miss Althea, that's very unusual." "I know," I cut in, gently but firmly. "But you know me. You know Kendrick. You know full well that if a patrol car comes screaming up with sirens and lights, he'll react badly. He'll fight. He'll scream. It'll turn into some ridiculous spectacle. I don't want that. I want him to look me in the eye. I want him to look into Clarissa's eyes. And I want him to look into yours, Vernon. I want him to understand what he's done. I don't want him to be just some drunk being dragged out of a house. I want him to feel the full weight of his community's disappointment. Do you understand?" He went silent again for a long moment, then finally said, "I understand, Miss Althea. 8 o'clock sharp. We'll be there. You need to lock your bedroom door to stay safe. If he wakes up, if he tries anything, you call me immediately. Understood?" "Understood, Vernon. Thank you." "May the Lord watch over you, Miss Althea," he said, then hung up. 2 calls done, 1 left, the most personal one. I dialed the Atlanta area code. My sister, Marcia. She picked up on the very first ring, as if she had been sitting there waiting. "Althea, I could feel it. I knew it was you." What has he done this time? Marcia and I had always had that kind of bond. She just knew. I told her everything. The broken vase, the shouting, the shove, the slap. She listened in silence. I could only hear her breathing on the other end. When I finished, my sister didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "You should have left a long time ago." She just said, her voice heavy with anger and love, "So what are you going to do?" I called Clarissa and Detective Tate. "They'll be here at 8 a.m., I answered, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "I'm going to press charges, Marcia." A sharp sob broke from her side of the line. "Oh, Althea, my poor sister, I am so sorry." "You know," I said softly, I just wanted you to know. I wanted someone in the family to know what I've done, so that if I ever waver later, I can remind myself of this night, of today." "You'll remember," she promised. "I'll catch the first bus to Chicago this morning. I'll be there before evening." "Thank you. Take care of yourself, Althea. And remember this, you are the strongest woman I know." I hung up, put the phone back in its cradle. 3 calls completed. 3 pillars of the plan raised: moral authority, the law, and family. A deep, soul-level exhaustion washed over me, the kind that seems to spill straight out of your spirit. And yet, at the same time, I felt lighter, as if a 2-ton boulder had been lifted off my back. The boulder called silence. I looked up at the clock. Almost 6 a.m. Outside the window, the sky was shifting from solid black to bruised blue-gray. The storm outside had passed. I had 2 hours left. 2 hours to finish breakfast. 2 hours to prepare myself. 2 hours to brace for the final hearing. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, took out sugar and peaches, and started making peach preserves. Justice, in the end, would be served. And in this little house in Bronzeville, justice would taste sweet, with a hint of bitterness. Gray morning light slipped through the kitchen window, spreading across the wooden floor. For the first time in 2 years, a new day began, and I did not feel afraid. The smell of freshly baked biscuits, butter, flour, and something like determination filled the kitchen. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had cradled Kendrick when he was born, cooked countless meals for him, and last night, those hands had dialed the police. A tear fell, carving a clean line through the flour on my skin. I let it fall. It hurt, but it was the hurt of a wound being washed clean, no longer bandaged over to fester. I looked around the kitchen, flour scattered, dishes in the sink, the dried blood stain on the corner of the cabinet. I began to clean. I washed every bowl, every plate in hot water until they shone. I mopped the floor, knelt to scrub flour stuck in the cracks of the wood, even though my back still ached from last night's shove. I wiped the counters, the refrigerator, even the hidden corners no one ever sees. Finally, I knelt in front of the dried blood on the china cabinet. My blood, evidence of last night. I dipped the cloth into warm, soapy water and scrubbed slowly until the red faded, then disappeared. The memory did not. But the kitchen brightened again, as if nothing had ever happened. On the outside, everything was clean and orderly. On the inside, I knew. Today would no longer be a layer of varnish covering the truth. If you're thinking, it's just washing dishes and cleaning the house. For me that morning, every clean plate, every erased bloodstain was a declaration. This house would no longer be the crime scene of Kendrick's rage. In just a little while, at this very table, the roles would reverse, and the man of the house would sit in the defendant's chair. I turned back to the food. Golden biscuits were stacked high on a platter. I opened canned peaches, poured them into a small pot, added brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg. The warm sweetness of peaches mixed with butter in the air, bringing back Kendrick's childhood. When he was little, peach jam and fresh biscuits were the sweet medicine every time he was sick. This morning, I was preparing his favorite breakfast for the harshest day of his life. I cooked creamy corn grits, added butter, stirred in cheddar until it melted. Comfort food, soul food. But in my mind, This was less a family breakfast and more a last meal before a sentence. When everything was nearly done, I thought about the knives, the German steel kitchen set Marcia had sent, which I always kept sharp. I pulled out the small paring knife and sliced strawberries and melon to garnish the table. Each cut was clean, precise, like a surgery. In a way, my life depended on the operation that was about to take place. The food was ready. Now it was time to set the table. I opened the china cabinet, the very one I had been thrown into last night. My hand slid across the old wood, feeling the weight of this home's history. I took out the best tablecloth from the linen closet, white linen, edged with lace my grandmother had sewn by hand. I spread it over the table, turning the dark wood into a white backdrop for the trial to come. I took out the wedding china, the crystal glasses, washed and dried them again. I set 4 places. At the head, my seat. To the right, for Clarissa. To the left, for Detective Vernon. The opposite head, for Kendrick. I laid out the polished silverware, folded the white linen napkins. In the center, I placed a single white camellia in a small crystal vase. The table looked ready to welcome a king, or for a sacrifice. And I understood. The line between the two was thinner than I had ever imagined. Everything was ready. The food, the table. Now it was my turn. I went upstairs, past Kendrick's room, hearing his heavy snoring, sleeping soundly, unaware of the earthquake approaching. For a second, my chest tightened. A part of me wanted to open the door, shake him awake, and say, "Get up before it's too late." But I didn't. I kept walking, back to my room. My bedroom was simple, tidy. I stepped into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise beneath my eye had darkened, my lip was swollen, my face both familiar and strange. I ran a hot bath, added lavender bath salts, then sank into the water. Heat touched the bruises on my back, burning at first, then easing. I washed my hair, scrubbed off the smell of sweat, flour, and fear. In the quiet, a silent prayer formed in my mind. Lord, give me the strength to love myself, the courage not to live like this anymore. If I am wrong, show me. If I am right, stand with me. After the bath, I went to the closet and took out my Sunday dress, navy crepe, long sleeves, high neckline, falling to mid-calf. A modest, solemn dress, one you wear to church, to a funeral, or to a hearing. I put it on, combed my hair, twisted it into a low bun at the nape of my neck. Looking in the mirror again, the bruise and the swollen lips stood out starkly against the dark fabric, exactly as I wanted. Today, I would hide nothing. My wounds would be my witnesses. I strapped on the back brace the doctor had recommended, tightening it. It supported my aching spine and forced me to stand straight. Today, I would not hunch, would not bow. I checked the clock. 7:40, almost time. I went downstairs. The smell of coffee, corn grits, peaches, and butter mingled with a silence pulled tight like a wire. I poured the coffee into the porcelain pot, ladled the grits into bowls, spooned peach preserves into a crystal dish, and carried them to the table. Everything was in its place, neat, perfect, a dangerous kind of perfection. I sat in my chair at the head of the table, smoothed my dress, laid my hands on my lap, and breathed evenly. I was ready. And right then, I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Kendrick was awake. The guest of honor was about to come down to attend his own feast. The bed creaked. Footsteps shuffled across the wooden floor above. I knew those sounds too well, the sounds of a hangover, of a man dragging himself up through a fog of headache, fatigue, and the flimsy, short-lived kind of regret. I sat at the head of the table, fingers laced, back straight as a statue. My heart didn't race, my breathing didn't change. The dining room looked like a Sunday feast. White tablecloth, the finest china, polished silverware, corn grits, biscuits, peaches, cinnamon, steaming coffee. His steps came down the stairs. Each wooden step had its own distinct creak, and I knew them all. Then he stopped in the hallway. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The shattered blue vase on the floor, the shards I had deliberately left untouched, evidence of last night's rampage. I waited for a sigh, a flicker of shame. Instead, I heard a derisive snort, then the scrape of shoes kicking the shards into the corner like trash. In that moment, whatever pity was left in me evaporated, leaving nothing but the cold clarity of resolve. He stepped into the dining room doorway, one hand on the frame, eyes squinting against the light. Wrinkled khakis, an old polo shirt, hair damp, face puffy, bloodshot eyes, patchy stubble. His gaze swept over the lavish breakfast, the aroma of coffee and fresh biscuits, then landed on my face. His eyes paused on my swollen lip and bruised cheek. But there was no shock, no remorse, only a tiny flicker of satisfaction that flashed and disappeared. Instantly, confusion gave way to arrogance. A crooked smirk crawled across his face. In his mind, this breakfast wasn't a trap. It was a white flag. In his twisted worldview, the slap had worked, and this was a make-up meal. "Well, well," he said, voice still thick with liquor, striding toward the table like a lord returning to his domain. "What's the occasion for this royal spread?" I stayed silent, staring straight ahead. My silence only made him more pleased with himself. He yanked out the chair at the head of the table opposite me and plopped down. He fiddled with the linen napkin, tossed it into his lap, then reached for the largest, prettiest biscuit. "Gotta hand it to you, Ma," he said, chewing with his mouth open, crumbs falling all over the tablecloth. "Nobody makes biscuits like you do." He pointed the remaining half of the biscuit at me. "See? You finally understand who runs this house. Little bit of discipline and everything snaps into place. Simple as that." Every word was another invisible punch. On the outside, I remained composed. Inside, I knew. He felt no remorse. He was proud of hurting me, convinced that violence was the answer. He reached for the coffee pot. The doorbell rang. Ding-dong. Clear, sharp, right on time. If you're listening now, picture this. The man who slapped his mother last night is leisurely eating breakfast, and just as he reaches for the coffee, that bell rings. He thinks it's just another morning. But the people behind that door are about to turn this breakfast table into a courtroom. Kendrick froze, his hand hovering above the coffee pot. He frowned. "Who's that this early? You invite somebody?" "Yes," I answered, my first words of the morning, voice even. "I did." "Invite who?" "I don't want to see anybody. Tell them to leave." I ignored him. I placed my hands on the table, stood up, smoothed my navy dress, and walked out of the dining room, down the hallway. "Ma, you hear me?" he yelled behind me. "I said send them away." I didn't turn back. My Sunday shoes tapped softly against the wood. At the front door, I took a deep breath. My reflection in the frosted glass showed a woman with a bruised face, but a straight back and lifted chin. It was time. I turned the knob and opened the door. The chilly morning air rushed in. On the porch stood 3 people. Clarissa Dubose in a peach linen suit, pearls at her neck, her face bearing the calm severity of a judge. Beside her was Detective Vernon Tate in full uniform, cap in hand, eyes a mixture of concern and resolve. Behind him, 2 younger officers, faces professional. Clarissa looked at the bruises on my face, pressed her lips together, then gave a slight nod. "I'm here. We're here." "Good morning, Althea," she said. "Good morning, Clarissa." "Detective," I replied. "Please come in. The coffee's ready." I stepped aside. They entered, bringing with them a different kind of air. Thick, heavy, shaped like law and consequence. They followed me into the dining room. Kendrick, standing irritably at the doorway, turned to look. In a single instant, his whole world began to collapse. Seeing Clarissa stride in with the bearing of a judge, seeing Vernon's uniform and the 2 officers behind him, his jaw just about hit the floor. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray-green of terror. The biscuit slipped from his hand, clinking onto the plate and rolling to the floor, breaking apart. the tiniest sound, but the full stop to his reign in this house. The air grew thick. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded unnaturally loud. Kendrick stood frozen, eyes darting between me, Clarissa, and the officers. At last he looked at me, his voice cracking. "Ma, what are you doing?" I didn't need to answer. Clarissa spoke for me, not with words, but with what she did. She stepped forward, completely ignoring him, walking straight to the table. She did not sit in the chair I had set for her to my right. Instead, she pulled out the chair at the opposite head of the table, Robert's old seat, the one Kendrick had claimed for himself these last 2 years. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor rang out, heavy and clear. She sat, smoothed her lapel, set her leather bag beside her, and lifted her eyes to Kendrick. She didn't raise her voice, didn't insult him, didn't roar. She just looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had upheld the law her entire life and a friend who had witnessed 60 years of mine. Under that gaze, the man who had hurled me into a china cabinet just hours before looked no more than a lost boy. Detective Vernon and the 2 officers stood blocking the doorway, silent, but their uniforms, their posture, their badges spoke plainly. Breakfast was over. The trial had begun. Clarissa did not take her eyes off my son. Her hand calmly lifted the porcelain coffee pot. "The coffee smells wonderful, Althea," she said, her voice as smooth as if we were just having an afternoon tea. She poured herself a cup, added a little cream, and stirred. The faint clink of silver spoon against china sliced through the tense air. She took a sip, set the cup down, and only then spoke. "Kendrick." Her voice was low, not loud, but it filled the room. "I remember when you were little, running up to my fence, holding a dandelion, saying, 'Look, Auntie Clarissa, a flower for you.' I remember you carrying grocery bags almost bigger than you were, always so polite. Let me do that for you, Auntie Clarissa. You shouldn't strain yourself." Every sentence she spoke was a hammer strike against the image of the man he was supposed to become, completely at odds with the person now trembling in front of us. "Your father," she said, the name Robert hanging in the air, "would have been so proud of that little boy, the first in the family to go to college, the pride of this community, the pride of your mother." She glanced at me, then back at Kendrick. The softness in her voice vanished. "Where did that man go, Kendrick?" He swallowed hard. "Auntie Clarissa, I don't know what you're talking about. This is just a misunderstanding in the family, that's all." It was the worst thing he could have chosen to say. "A misunderstanding in the family?" Her voice dripped with irony. She pointed straight at me. "Look at your mother's face, split lip, bruise under her eye. Does that look like a misunderstanding to you?" He dropped his gaze to the floor, where biscuit crumbs were scattered, a remnant of the victorious morning he thought he was having. "No," her voice now was ice cold. "There is a name for this, and you and I both know exactly what it is." That was when Detective Vernon stepped forward. He took a notebook from his pocket, standing calm and steady. "Kendrick Robinson," Vernon said, his voice deep, even, completely official. "Over the past 6 months, we've received multiple disturbance complaints. Noise, loud music at night, shouting." Kendrick hunched his shoulders, still staring at the floor. "We have a record of a bar fight at Salty Dog 3 weeks ago. You needed police intervention and were released with a warning, and 2 incomplete reports involving traffic stops for reckless driving after leaving bars. In short, you've been on our radar." Vernon paused, his expression growing more serious. "At 4:37 a.m. this morning, I received a call reporting a domestic assault at this address. The victim, your mother, Mrs. Althea Robinson." Every word Vernon spoke was a nail driven down, right here in the dining room where Kendrick grew up, in front of the woman who had once called him her pride. The air was thick with humiliation. I stood up. Every eye turned to me. My back hurt, but the brace beneath my dress held me upright. Today, I would not bend. I walked around the table and stopped beside Clarissa's shoulder, resting my hand on it, drawing strength from her steadiness. Then I turned to face my son, really face him. For the first time in a very long time, he was the one who couldn't hold my gaze. "Kendrick," I began. My voice was calm, but there was no warmth left in it. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through a night in hell and was still standing. That morning, I had deliberately applied the deep, wine-colored lipstick my granddaughter had sent me. Not to look pretty, but so my lips wouldn't tremble when I said these words. "Son," I said, "I didn't call them here because I hate you. I called them because I love you." He snorted. "You love me? You call the police on someone you love?" "Sometimes," I replied, not blinking. "Love isn't about shielding someone from consequences. It's about walking them straight to those consequences." The room fell silent again. Only the faint steam from the coffee rose between us. The trap was set, the witnesses present, the law standing there. Now it was time for the victim to speak. I looked deep into Kendrick's eyes, the same eyes that used to glow at his graduation, now filled only with fear and self-pity. "Family matter, you said?" I repeated. "You want to talk about family? Then let's be clear." I took a step forward. "Family is your father, Robert, going to work before dawn and coming home after sunset at the docks, hands calloused, back so sore he could barely stand straight, just so you could have books and food on this very table. That is family." Another step. "Family, my son, is your mother after your father died. Sitting up late sewing until her fingers cracked, then mopping office floors at night, coming home near midnight just to keep up with your college tuition so you could have a better future than we ever did. That is family." He shrank into his chair. "And you?" My voice shook now, not from weakness, but from righteous anger. "What did you do with this family? You took your parents' sacrifices and spat on them. You took your demotion, your disappointment, your frustration, and turned all of it into a weapon. And who did you point that weapon at? At your mother, the only person on this earth who has never walked away from you, not once." Tears streamed down my cheeks. I let them fall. Night after night, I've sat in that kitchen praying. I stopped asking God to promote you. I only asked him to let you come home quietly, go straight upstairs, and not let the poison in your mouth reach me. I prayed to be invisible in my own home. You turned my house into a prison. You turned a mother's love into a life sentence. I never meant to hurt you," he stammered, lifting his head. His tears were the tears of self-pity. "I drink too much. I lose control. It won't happen again, Ma. I swear to God." "No," I shook my head. "Don't bring God's name into this house today." "How many times have I heard that promise, Kendrick? How many mornings did you wake up with liquor still on your breath, wrap your arms around me, sob, and beg forgiveness? And I, foolish because I loved you, believed you. Every time, I forgave, I cleaned up, I lied to the neighbors, I hid my tears, I stood between you and the world." I leaned forward, my hand gripping the lace tablecloth. "And do you know what that forgiveness gave you? It gave you permission. My silence, my protection told you, it's all right, you're allowed to scream, break things, humiliate your mother. And last night they told you that you could hit her." The word hit landed raw and bare. "The worst part," I lowered my voice, "was not the pain. Bruises fade, lips heal. The worst part was your silence afterward. The way you turned your back and walked upstairs like you'd stepped on a dry leaf. Not a hint of remorse." In that silent moment, I understood. I was no longer facing a son having a bad day. I was facing a man who had found pleasure in hurting someone weaker than himself. And that someone was me. I looked over at Vernon. He said nothing, but the sorrow in his eyes, the eyes of a father with 2 daughters, said everything. "I carried you for 9 months, Kendrick." I turned back to him. "I raised you, built my whole life around you. My love for you is the strongest thing I have. But that love does not require me to stand still and be your punching bag. It does not force me to become an accomplice to your self-destruction. Protecting you from consequences now would only help you keep destroying yourself and drag me down with you." Now he began to sob for real. Loud, messy, the crying of a child caught red-handed, not a man truly repentant. "Ma, please, I'll go to rehab. I'll quit drinking. I'll go back to church. Anything. Just don't let them take me. This is family business." "Domestic violence laws are very clear, Kendrick," Vernon's voice cut in, calm but firm. "This isn't something we can pretend not to see." "What will the neighbors say?" Kendrick hiccuped, clinging to the shame he thought could still control me. I glanced at Robert's little gold watch on my wrist. 8:15. "From today on," I said slowly, "I don't care what the neighbors say anymore. I spent 2 years caring, and look where we are. Now I care about one thing, my peace. And that peace, Kendrick, begins with you no longer living in this house." I returned to my chair and sat down. I picked up the linen napkin, my hands completely steady, and served myself a spoonful of corn grits. I wasn't hungry at all, but that act was a symbol. I was taking back my life, taking back this table, taking back this house. Clarissa saw it and gave a slight nod. She turned to Kendrick, taking in his tear-streaked, snot-covered face. "Your tears," she said, her voice devoid of pity. "Do not move me, son. The tears of an abuser are always for themselves, never for the victim. By doing this, your mother is giving you the only real chance you have, the chance to face the man in the mirror without the excuse of a bottle, without the shield of her unconditional forgiveness. She is forcing you to grow up. And that, Kendrick, is the greatest act of love you will ever receive, its most painful but most truthful form." Then she turned to Detective Vernon and gave him a small nod. The signal had been given. The trial at the breakfast table was over. The sentence was about to be carried out. Clarissa's slight nod to Detective Vernon sounded to me like a judge's gavel. He slipped his notebook back into his pocket, stepped fully into the dining room, the younger officer following close behind. The atmosphere changed at once. The talking was done. Now it was time to act. "Kendrick," Vernon's voice rang out, formal, firm, no longer the church deacon but the officer. "I'm going to ask you to stand up and place your hands behind your back." Kendrick's sobbing stopped, replaced by raw panic. "No! Come on, you're joking," he stammered. "Vernon, you've known me since I was a kid. You saw me get baptized. You're really going to arrest me in my own house in front of my mama?" "I'm arresting you for your mama, Kendrick," Vernon answered, steady as stone. "And because the law requires it, don't make this harder than it needs to be." The young officer moved behind Kendrick's chair. That simple motion snapped the last bit of paralysis. Kendrick lurched to his feet, knocking the chair back. "Don't touch me!" he roared. "This is family business. Just an argument. Everybody argues." He spun toward me, his eyes wild, half pleading, half furious. "Ma, tell them. Tell them it was just a fight, that I lost my temper. All you have to do is say you don't want to press charges, and this all stops. Ma, please." Every gaze in the room shifted to me. For a heartbeat, I felt myself being dragged backward into that old role, the mother who always shielded her son from his own actions. I squeezed the magnolia-printed silk scarf Robert once gave me, the fabric already damp with the tears I refused to let fall now. I looked at Kendrick, his face twisted with rage and fear, and I made my choice. "I've said everything I needed to say, Kendrick," I replied, my voice low but clear. "I will not lie to protect you anymore. Not anymore." That was the final verdict. His face crumpled. He seemed to collapse inward, anger dissolving into despair. "Please, Ma," he whispered. "Please don't do this." Vernon didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, took one of Kendrick's wrists, and turned him around. The other officer took his other arm, and then that sound came. Click. handcuffs. The sound of freedom. For me. The sound of rock bottom. For my son. Kendrick sobbed, then went still, head bowed, shoulders slumped, as Vernon read him his rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Words I had only ever heard in movies now echoed in my own dining room, meant for my own son. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, an attorney will be appointed for you. Clarissa remained at the head of the table, back straight, silent as a judge. Her presence alone was proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't making anything up. They began to lead Kendrick out of the room. As he passed me, he stopped and lifted his head. His face was soaked with tears. "Ma," he said. For a moment, I thought he was going to apologize, but he didn't. "You're going to regret this," he hissed between his teeth. "You'll sit in this old house with your antiques, and you'll regret it." It was the last lash of an abuser, one final attempt to reclaim control through fear. But the fear inside me had died that morning. I looked him straight in the eye, calm. "Maybe, Kendrick. Maybe one day I'll regret that things had to go this far. But I will never regret choosing my life and my peace today." Vernon tightened his grip lightly. "Let's go, Kendrick." They walked out. I remained in the dining room, listening. The footsteps on the wooden hallway floor, the front door opening, morning light pouring in, though I didn't go to see. I didn't want to meet the neighbors' eyes, didn't want to watch my son being put into a police car. I just listened. Footsteps on the porch steps, the car door slamming shut, a hollow, decisive sound, the engine starting, tires rolling away, growing softer, then fading completely. Then silence returned. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. No longer the heavy, suffocating silence of waiting and fear, but an empty, aching, and relieved silence. The silence of a house that would no longer hold its breath at the sound of a key in the lock, at the slam of the door, at the storm of a drunk stumbling in. I don't know how long I stood there. Muscles that had been clenched since the night before began to loosen. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a deep fatigue that made my legs buckle. A steady hand caught my arm. Clarissa. She guided me back to my chair. The remaining officer pulled the chair out for me. She eased me down, her hand still on my shoulder. "It's over, Althea," she said softly. "It's done." And there, in a room that still smelled of coffee and biscuits, with my oldest friend beside me, I finally let myself collapse. I covered my face with both hands, and I cried. I cried for the son I thought I had. I cried for the humiliation, the injuries, the long nights of silence. I cried for little Kendrick with the dandelion, and for the man he never became. I cried for the lonely road ahead. And I also cried from the shuddering relief of finally, completely being free. Clarissa didn't say anything more. She just sat beside me, one hand on my shoulder, and let me cry until the sobs subsided and there were no tears left. I lifted my head. Sunlight through the window was clearer now, the sky no longer gray. A new day had truly begun. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of it. In the months that followed, I learned something that sounds simple, but I had never truly done in my whole life. I learned to care for myself. Dr. Simone had been right. You've spent your whole life on other people. Now it's time to give some of it back to yourself. I kept going to therapy, peeling back each layer of fear, each layer of guilt. I returned to the sewing group at church, where the women didn't ask a single question. They just hugged me for a long time. Slowly, the house became a home again, not a prison of silence and fear. Clarissa and I went back to our afternoon teas. The quiet between us became peaceful, no longer suffocating. I bought a tablet, learned to read the news, and make video calls with Marcia. The world opened up again, and I realized I was stronger than I thought. I learned that setting boundaries is not selfish. Real love sometimes has to say no, and asking for help is an act of strength. If you are living in fear, walking on eggshells in your own house, listen closely. This is not your fault. You deserve to be safe, in your home, in your body, in your life. Love does not hurt you. Control does. Leaving is hard, but staying can cost you your life, your body, and your soul. And out there, help exists. Hotlines, shelters, therapy, support groups. You are not alone. 6 months later, the rehab center called. Kendrick was sober, working again, and wanted to see me in a supervised visit. I was afraid, not of him, but of my own heart, of my instinct to forgive too easily. I asked Clarissa. I asked my doctor. They reminded me that meeting him did not mean inviting him back into my life. It took me a week to reply. And in the end, I knew I had to go. Not for him, but for me. To put a final period at the end of that old story, a period that might close it or mark the beginning of a new one. Today, sitting on my porch, I realize I am truly at peace. Kendrick is alive, sober, trying to rebuild his life at 42. The price was far too high, but sometimes change only comes through the harshest road. And I understand the most important thing of all. A mother's love does not mean standing still and letting herself be hurt. Sometimes love is drawing a line in the sand and saying, I love you, but I love myself more. You do not get to cross this line. Real family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay by your side when others are trying to pull you under. And what about you? How much longer will you stay? Or will you choose one trembling but determined day to take your life back? If my story has touched you, don't walk away in silence. Share it so it can become a lifeline for someone out there. And if you need a quiet corner to hear true stories, stay with me. Here, there will always be a woman who has walked through the storm, ready to sit and tell stories with you.